Let's watch this Pat Bev video. At least most of it. So Pat Bev on Get Up with Stephen A. Smith and Mike Greenberg. And Greeny really didn't say anything. So let's watch.
Is he going to be a Hall of Fame? No question about it.
Yeah.
Right? No question about it. Do guys in the NBA go to sleep early the night before playing the Phoenix Suns? Hell no. No.
You mean as a team, or would you talk about Chris Paul individually?
Chris Paul individually.
Okay.
No. I'm going
Literally
to
going
44.
out of his way to slander Chris Paul. How remarkable.
Over there in Phoenix, I'm going to have me a nice little wine, probably sweat it out, and but the pregame shoot around and get ready for Chris Paul. Steph Curry, I'm going to bed at 8 o'clock. Mom, don't call me. My girl, don't call me. I'm locked in right now. It's two different monsters. That's all.
Yeah, well, listen. He plays. I don't. So if you going to tell me.
I've seen this clip. I want to let you know Stephen A. Smith has a very good take right now.
That he don't go up. You ain't going to sleep early for Chris Paul. That's fine. But what I'm saying about Chris Paul is this, and this is what can't be ignored. Quintessential point guard, floor general, make others around you better, knowing everybody's job, knowing what everybody is supposed to do, and being that elite floor general. That's not deniable. Now, what I would say to Patrick Beverly and my little brother here is being a little bit disingenuous is this.
It's a hell of a word.
Let me say, well, you understand it. You're a highly intelligent brother. You act like you don't know what you know exactly what
this is not the take I was talking
about. The point that I'm trying to make to you about it is this. No. Why do you go to sleep early for Steph Curry? Because Steph Curry could drop 40 or 50 on you. That's why. See, you go to bed early for dudes that can embarrass you, that will literally wake up the next or go against you the next night and take you to school. So you get up to make sure they ain't going to do that to you. Most instances, that's not what Chris Paul is going to do. When Chris Paul was sensational and we were going ballistic because of what he was doing in Game 2, he had 28 points and 14 assists. That's not something you lose sleep over. That's a
exactly. When Chris Paul has an outstanding game, he drops like 28 points, 15 assists. Not great look for a defender, but that's not embarrassing. But Steph Curry, when he has a good game, is dropping 40 to 50 on your head. As a defender, that is embarrassing.
Ain't nobody worried about Chris Paul when he played Phoenix Suns. Nobody in the NBA.
Well, what did I just say, though?
And I'm just letting you know how NBA.
I gotta say, I feel like this is cap. Maybe Patrick Bev doesn't worry about Chris Paul, but I'm sure there are other teams who care a lot about Chris Paul and worry about Chris Paul when they play against him. Not to the extent of Steph Curry. I'm not saying that. But certainly people worry about Chris Paul because he makes his teams better.
So let's not get it twisted, man. He should have fouled out. He can't guard. He literally can't guard.
He can't guard.
Yeah.
He can't. Chris Paul can't guard anybody? Is that what you say?
Did you see that? No, he can't. Everyone knows that.
Excuse me.
Everyone knows that. But Pat Beverly's talking out of his fucking ass, man.
I know that. I haven't heard anybody tell me that.
Because you haven't suited up. You know, guys don't like to tell you all the truth. You know that. Because they scared what you going to take with it.
No, he's right about that. They will lie. He's honest. They will lie. That is true. He's not lying about that.
CP can't guard nobody.
But I also don't think he
can
guard
everybody knows that.
Guard anybody.
What we call them? Cone. You know what you do with cones? Like when in the summertime, you got a cone. You make a move. What does the cone do?
Stay still.
Exactly. Yeah. He's a cone. Stop playing, man.
Bro, watch yourself now.
Come on now. Come on now.
Don't compare CP3 to Ben Simmons.
No, I didn't compare. I said.
I love this. Look at Greenberg right now. Knowing this shit's about to go fucking viral. Sorry, I was talking over it. Patrick Bev just said he's the best defender in the world.
I'm giving you props for that, my brother.
The best in the world.
Okay, well, you should feel that way about yourself. I don't feel that way about you, but you should feel that way about yourself.
ESPN gave me the numbers.
That you're the best in the world?
It's Giannis at 41.3%, and it's Patrick Beverly at 41.9%, which means if you have the ball and Patrick Beverly is guarding, it feels like Giannis is guarding you. I'm only 6 feet. Yeah. What do you want me to do?
Well, I did say
the greatest in the world.
To ask them to play some defense, you going to tell me that CP3 can't defend compared to most of the NBA? I beg to differ, and I think you do too when you compare him to most of the NBA. There's a whole bunch of cats in the NBA that can't defend.
No, when I compare him to top 10 greatest point guards ever.
Okay, all right.
I'm not looking at
that. But that's different. That's different. You said the man can't defend.
No, I'm not saying that, but now you want me to take.
Well, he did say Chris Paul can't defend. He literally did say that.
Man. He should have fouled out. He can't guard. He literally can't guard what CP is and put him in a bottle with everyone else. I won't do that. I would not do that.
Okay.
I'm going to judge him.
Just because Pat Bev is a good defender, don't discredit Chris Paul. Yeah, exactly.
Based off exactly.
Stephen A. handled this interview, or this discussion very well, because Pat Bev was saying some ridiculous shit. Stephen A. Smith wasn't intimidated by having a pro athlete, because he's talked to so many before, obviously, but stood his ground, told the guy straight up disagree with him. You told Pat Bev he was straight up wrong.
Exactly.
Literally just went out of his way to talk all that shit about Chris Paul, which was just unbelievable levels of pettiness. Like, I said it in the amateur TV video. You literally have to applaud the level of pettiness and the level of hate he has for Chris Paul to go so far out of his way to talk shit all the time. You have to applaud that. It's an ugly trait. You have to applaud. Like, he really hates Chris Paul. And I think that was proof of it. But what I want to discuss today on stream, I want to discuss the validity of the case against Chris Paul in the high-profile playoff games, in the elimination games. And I want to compare him to Paul George, who gets so much shit for the way he plays in elimination games. So that's what we want to uncover. But anyways, Chris Paul in elimination games. So first of all, we want to kind of discuss Paul George compared to Chris Paul, but we also want to just, give Chris Paul a fair assessment, not debating him against any specific player. So Chris Paul in elimination games. Wow. Ugly record for a player who is as good as he is. I will give him a slight benefit of the doubt that he's typically been on the inferior team in these games. So we go to the Pelicans. He's been on inferior teams. OKC, he was the inferior team there. Phoenix, both times, I would not say he was the inferior team. Clippers, most of the time, you might say he was the superior team. But, a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Maybe not always in the best team. Nonetheless, 6-12, not great. We go to Paul George. Paul George is 10-10 in elimination games. And especially playing for Indiana, you could say he was on the inferior team. With OKC, probably the superior team. Most cases. And with the Clippers, you'd have to probably say the superior team. So, interesting to look at. We'll dive a little bit more into Paul George's stats in a second. But let's look at Chris Paul first. So Chris Paul in elimination games, these are his averages in those elimination games. So he's 6 for 12, 18 elimination games. He plays pretty well in elimination games. Let me tell you. Let's just zoom in a little bit. So averages over 40 minutes, 48% from the field, 37% from three if we're rounding. Very good numbers. He averages 21 points per game, 9 assists per game. These are fine numbers. And then we go to the specific performances. And let's actually zoom out so we can see the headers. But point-wise, last night was probably his worst elimination game performance. Actually, no. Was probably his worst elimination game performance since, I would say, his 2009 game with the Pelicans, where he went 12 points, 10 assists on 31% shooting. Arguably, the way he played and the way the Suns lost, where he was a minus 39, this was probably his worst. At least he shot 4 for 8. Here he shot 5 for 16, was a minus 24, as he lost with the Pelicans against Denver. Denver were good, I think, back then. I mean, they're good now, but they were really good then, I think. But ultimately, I see a lot of really good performances here from Chris Paul. Paul George, who we're obviously comparing to, his averages in elimination games, where he's 10-10. Same amount of minutes, almost 22 points per game, 43.5% from the field, so a little bit lower, not great. 31% from three, a little bit lower, not great, right? These aren't the best stats. We go to individual performances, and this is where it's kind of weird for Paul George, because recently he hasn't been maybe the best all the time, but there are some damn good performances here, especially in Indiana as he was entering his prime. Especially before that horrific injury. Like, this guy was putting up 30 bombs. High 20s in elimination games. there's obviously some mixtures of performances, and these really early in his career. I mean, I don't really want to look at those too in depth. But recently with the Clippers, I mean, 41 points in this one, 21 here. Other than the 41 points last year in Game 5 against the Clippers, I think it was, he hasn't been great. And for some reason, ever since he's gone to the Clippers, he's kind of regressed in terms of what he produces in these elimination games. His worst is here with OKC, where he shot 2 for 16 against the Jazz. Jesus Christ, PG. Jesus Christ, man. But Paul George typically does decently in these elimination games. Recently, not great, and that's where the slander has come. And, you know, the one against Denver, Jesus Christ, 4 for 16 when they blew the 3-1 series lead. Now that's bad. But overall, his stats aren't bad. Chris Paul's are a little bit better. But we do need to talk about the 6-12 record in elimination games. We do need to talk about how the fact that Chris Paul, I believe he has now blown 5 different 2-0 series leads. Blew one this year to Dallas. They're up 2-0. Last year in the NBA Finals, they were up 2-0 and lost in 6. So how much of this is on Chris Paul? I think a lot of the times Chris Paul has been the best player on his team in these series. I wouldn't say that was the case for the Suns. Devin Booker is the best player on that team. But, I mean, I think there's people who might argue it's Chris Paul as the better player. Anyways, as it comes to Chris Paul in these playoff settings, I think there is a discussion that needs to be had. For some reason, Chris Paul is looked upon so highly, and I think for lots of good reasons. But I agree to a degree of what Pat Beverly said. Like, you need to talk about him in the same vein as Paul George. And I believe Paul George doesn't deserve all the slander he gets. I think some of the slander is warranted, not all of it. As it comes to Chris Paul, he has a really good rep. And thinking about it today, I'm really struggling to understand how he got such a good rep. Because obviously he's a phenomenal player. He makes everybody around him better. Quintessential general on the floor. That is just so necessary to a team. He's so good. We know that. But there's known playoff struggles. There's known playoff collapses with himself involved. Regardless, he's notorious for blowing series leads in playoffs. He's only been to the conference finals twice in his career. He went beyond it once, but he's only gotten to that point twice. One of the times he did get injured. Chris Paul, notorious for playoff collapses, maybe slightly developing, doesn't really perform in the playoffs at the level you'd expect. I would say that's a bit iffy. And just known for not being a great teammate either. Like, known for not being the best of teammates. From a personal standpoint. Not from a player standpoint. From a personal standpoint. So, we have a guy who is looked upon in such a high regard. And this is where I kind of agree with Pat Bev. You have a guy in Chris Paul looked upon so highly, who is notorious for losing playoff series. Notorious a little bit for not playing well in the big playoff games. And also notorious for not being a good teammate. So that got me really thinking, like, why do we hold Chris Paul into such a high regard? I don't really have an answer to that. I just think it's because people really like watching him play and how good he plays. But the reality is he loses a lot of these. Like, he's 6-12 in elimination games. So it is confusing to see where this comes from. But Chris Paul deserves more slander, I think. And he's finally starting to get some towards him. I would say, based on Chris Paul's career, he deserves an NBA championship at some point. I think this is the best team he's ever played on this year. Better than the team that went to the finals last year. And this year was a real wasted opportunity for him and the Phoenix Suns. Now, they're good enough to run it back. See what happens with DeAndre Ayton. Potentially an RFA. Well, he is an RFA. Will the Suns sign him? Will he go somewhere else? What will the Suns look like next season? That's what we'll have to see. Chris Paul, undoubtedly a great player, but I think I disagree with a lot of what Pat Bev said, but I agree with the fact that maybe you do need to give him a little bit more slant.